Hello and welcome back to the shop. Many years ago I was part of a group of friends who would go out in four-wheel drive vehicles and spend the day conquering nature. If we look at this photo we can see my wife's Land Rover bracketed by a pair of Suzuki Jeeps. And in this one both she and I are using someone else's Land Rover as a place to sit. Usually these trips would be informal one-day affairs, but after a while we started to organise competitions. My wife and I used Series 3 and 2A lightweight Land Rovers at first. I painted mine in camouflage colours, and I'll leave you to guess how long that took. In this water damaged photo you can see me behind the wheel of my wife's lightweight, though in fact that run didn't go too well for me. Still, she was very forgiving. Sometimes I rode shotgun, as I was here in this flat fender Jeep, but eventually I built myself a Range Rover in which to compete. I bought it from a friend for £650 with an absolutely knackered 3.5 litre Ford York in it. I took that out, bought another Range Rover and removed its engine. It was a Perkins 6247 4052 TC straight 6 diesel. It was very slow and quite heavy. I didn't care that it was slow, and it didn't seem to matter too much that it was heavy. It could go absolutely anywhere that my friends could go, even the light, nimble Suzukis. Both the vehicles in this photograph are mine. The one on the left is a Suzuki LJ80, which has of course the 800cc engine, so it's a K car, but re-engined for Europe. When this photograph was taken, the gentleman standing in the white t-shirt didn't know that we'd still be friends 30 years later, and certainly didn't know that in a couple of years he'd have a son who would grow up to become a great friend of mine. And that son has no memory of my Range Rover, though he remembers his father's G-Wagon very dearly. But the other day he surprised me with a gift. This is the MN Models MN168 hardbody Range Rover, and my friend Adam bought it for me specifically so that I could fulfill a very long dream and build my own replica of the Range Rover I had when I was young and strong and wealthy. I like this truck. I love the way it looks, apart from the Ross-style wheels. They've taken the trouble to get the wheels right, but they've made them far too big, and because of that they've had to cut the arches up really high. Now this doesn't matter at all to me, because my car had very high arches, and I'm able to buy some Land Rover style wheels to match the ones that were on my Range Rover. Unlike most of the projects of this nature that I do, this is already perfectly fine. It has hobby grade electronics and everything else, so this is really just an aesthetic transformation. I wonder how easy it will be to get the body off. Well, that wasn't too bad at all. I simply removed 4 screws, unplugged this and enlarged this hole to let me withdraw the plug that goes to the battery, and the body's off. I confess I was quite interested to see this chassis. It's pretty much standard MN models. The rails are different, and the most significant thing that I felt I should show you is that it has portal axles. Now, for someone trying to build an accurate replica of a real Range Rover that might be a problem, but as I'm building a replica of a greatly lifted Range Rover with enormous wheels and tyres, it shouldn't be a difficulty at all. This truck comes with oil shocks, but for some reason 3 out of the 4 shocks have no oil in them. So the first thing I'll do is whip them off camera, chuck some oil in and chuck them back on. Really what I want to do is get on with modifying the body. Obviously I plan to keep the screen and the front windows, so the first job for me is to get that transparent one-piece window set out and cut it. It looks as though this beige interior bit is screwed in. Now we're making progress. For reasons of their own, MN models have made this thing with a separate windscreen, no front side windows and rear windows, so I'll just remove all that rear glass. Excellent! It looks like it's time for some serious body surgery. It's starting to look just like my bobtail. However, the next thing I need to do is to cut off the back. I shall need to consult a photo to work out exactly where to cut it. Here's a good side view. Gosh, it really was pretty much all wheel arch, wasn't it? From the back of the door all the way to the transom across the rear of the thing. I've just measured it up, and on the photograph it's 7mm from the rear edge of the door to the centre of the rear axle, and it's 6mm from the centre of the rear axle to the transom across the back. So I'm going to measure the model, do some schoolboy arithmetic and cut it. As my vehicle had semicircular wheel arch cutouts, I think the next thing I need to do is to round those out, and that'll give me a clearer idea of whether or not I do need to remove a little bit more from the back. I think I do. Yes, it needs just a little more off the back. I sound like a barber. There, I've got the length right this time, and I refitted the interior to get it nice and square across the back. Unfortunately, although I have 7 or 8 photos of this vehicle, I only have one rear view. But we can see that across the back I just had a plain flat panel, adorned only with a vehicle reg plate, a spare wheel and 2 back lights which were Frenched in. In other words, their lenses were flush with the back panel. One thing I should point out is that if you want to hack the back part of the roof off something like a Range Rover, you can't just do that and then drive around, because the bodies are made of aluminium, so it's all very wobbly. Mine was stiffened up with box section steel, and I've tried to replicate that with my own model. Hopefully the styrene will stiffen up the top half of this body just as the steel stiffened up the top half of the aluminium one. I must confess that I'm definitely wishing I'd thought to do the cutouts for the rear lights before I glued the panel across the back. From the front, my truck also had 2 pretty characteristic visual features. One of these was this light, which I could orient by hand by sticking my arm out of the window. That was very useful off-road at night. And the other is this air scoop. This was there for a reason. The Perkins 6247, which I put in this truck, had a very big radiator, and in order to clear the thing without having it hanging down and getting smashed on rocks all the time, I had to mount it so high that I was forced to add that scoop. I remember this photo. I remember that day. It was a Saturday morning and I wanted to go and play with my truck, but I needed a radiator hose and everything was shut, and all I had was this PVC hose that was the right size. So I naively fitted that, and predictably it didn't last the day. We bridged it by cutting the end of the tailpipe from the silencer of my wife's Land Rover, and using Jubilee clips we cut out that ruptured section, bridged the gap with steel, and I got home. So, at the rear I need to add lights, a spare wheel and a reg plate, while up front I need to add the spot lamp and the air scoop. To make the spotlight, I took a 12-gram CO2 cartridge, drilled 2 1.5mm holes opposite each other at the rounded end. I then gave it a tin foil reflector and was lucky enough to find this protective grille, which I think might be from an MN Models FJ40. I added a clear plastic lens with vertical lines scratched onto it, and then my protective grille. I've cut down 3 nails to mount it and made a little bracket. And here it is in the bracket. With the spotlight done, it's time to turn my attention to the back, and specifically to the back lights. You can see here that I've removed the appropriate panel and have gouged away some material to allow me to withdraw the wiring. So this gives me the size of the apertures I'm going to need to cut. Here's one of the LED units removed. As luck would have it, the size coincides really well. One feature of this truck that I want to get right is the wheels. As you can see, the wheels themselves aren't particularly big, but the tyres are tall. These are the wheels and tyres I've bought for it, and though they look great from the side, they are a bit too wide. Still, they're just right in terms of height, and I'm lucky I was able to find them with the right hex. I'm installing a hard point on the panel so that later on I'll be able to fit the spare. Yeah, I think we've got the height of the spare wheel about right. The interior in my full-size truck was quite scruffy and battered, so I've attempted to weather it similarly. I've also moved the instrument binnacle across to the left because my truck was a left hooker, and added a shifter because, like most Europeans, I prefer to drive stick. I've also made the 3 cuts necessary to bend up the flap and form my radiator clearance air scoop, as well as masking off the rear light lenses to get us ready for paint. I'll chuck a coat of grey plastic primer on it and we'll see how it comes out. I primed the body and then refilled all the areas I'd filled badly. It always shows up so much better with a coat of primer. And I think this body's now ready for paint. The wheels as well. For the first time it's really starting to look like my old truck. But I do need to make some bumpers for it. I'm running low on thick styrene sheet, so I've cut the front bumper from a piece of pine. When he bought me the Range Rover, my friend Adam also very kindly bought me this pair of steel drive shafts, or prop shafts as we call them in England. So I'll be fitting those next. Adam did mention that when he bought me this truck, it cost very little extra to add the steel drive shafts. It makes me wonder why MN models didn't just fit them as stock, because I must say this really is quite high quality compared to their previous offerings. Making and mounting the front bumper was relatively straightforward. This one, the rear, was on the original vehicle made of C-channel with these strange things on the end, and it's been more of a nuisance to replicate, but what I've got here is 2 brackets temporarily glued in place, then that bit of wood's glued across behind them, and then a wood screw goes through all 3 things, biting into the wood. This will be the NATO hitch. It'll have this nice chunk of wood to bite into. Ready to be fitted. I've got the lights in, and so I'm pretty much ready to assemble the whole thing. However, we need a driver figure, and I'd like to get the driver figure in before mounting the steering wheel, in case that complicates things. Obviously what I'd really like is to have a perfect 3D printed model of me aged 30. But as that's not viable, we're going to go with Helen. She's a lovely girl, but she is tall, and this is going to pose a problem for fitting her in. In fact, to get her in, I've had to cut this little letterbox for her feet to poke through, but she does fit in with that done. Well, she's in with the wheel. I had to make the steering wheel removable to be able to get her out. So it's not actually glued in, it's simply held there by her hands. She is epoxied lightly to the seat. Let's put this thing together. This is the first time I've seen it fully assembled. With these MN models Range Rovers, for some reason you have to turn the car on first, which I've just done, and then you turn on the transmitter. I just want to make sure I haven't done anything silly, like wire the lights the wrong way around or something. Okay, so I'm going to turn the steering left. Yep, and we're indicating left. Like Phil from Tomley RC, I don't actually like indicators. I think they look very silly out on the trail. But I wanted to have them enabled, at least for this video. We also have rear lights and rear indicators. I've got my vehicle registration plates installed, but I'm not that keen on the grille I've put on my lamp. It's so chunky that at any distance at all it just looks black. I think it'll look more like my spot lamp with the grille removed, because you could hardly see the grille on mine. It was made of very thin wire. These are the lights from my MN40. The grills on them are much better than that horrible thing I stuck on my light. So I think I can see a change in the offing. Yes, that looks a lot better. Good. Jerry can and spare tyre next. And with those fitted, we can say it's finished. Okay, that went really well, but I think we can agree it was more of a love song to the original truck than a test. Let's see what this thing can do on the rocks. Right, this is tyres. I bought these tyres because they look right, not because they were grippy. Though of course you can't see from a thumbnail on Amazon how grippy they are. Let's try taking a run up. Well, that was surprising. It was tremendous. Apart from the tyre choice, which was my bad, it really did very, very well. This is a completely different kettle of fish to the old style MN model chassis. In fact, the next thing I'd like to do with it is take it out on the rocks and put it up against the most competent MN models I've been able to build, my little short beige coloured FJ45. Until that happens, however, thanks for watching.